Again, good morning to everyone, and good morning to the three panelists here as well. This is the 36th edition of SaaS Talks now. Just to give a quick context, the idea of this discussion is not to discuss sort of rags to riches story, even though we have great entrepreneurs on the call, but that's not what we are going to discuss. The idea is always to discuss some functional topic critical to building a SaaS company. And essentially things that you can potentially take away and think about what to do on a Monday morning with it. We usually do this on Friday. Due to scheduling things, we had to do this on Wednesday. This is a discussion. My colleague Shantan, who is literally just coming on stream here, and I, we are the host. We are going to set the context, ask a few questions in the beginning, but bulk of it will be driven by questions that the audience asks. The only request is please put your questions only on the Q&A panel, not on the chat channel. And number two is please put your questions related to topic, not outside the topic. If you have questions outside, please text us separately and we can schedule another one, another topic in the next few episodes. This is an interesting one because the topic for today actually came in a chance encounter with both Yash and Mayank, who I'm going to introduce shortly. This was an event that I was at, and we were just chatting. And the debate started about, should you be, as you start a SaaS company, should you be having initial customers in India or in the US, or even eventually actually built for India or built for US? And interestingly, both Mayank and Yash said that, look, you should do one of your episodes on this topic. And by the way, I did remind them that we had this discussion way back. I'm going to introduce both of them and then introduce Anant as well. But it's a topic where at least I know that we at Stellaris have taken a relatively one-sided view, but that may not actually tell the entire truth. And the idea was to have a more healthy debate and discussion on this topic, on the pros and cons of different approaches you can take. And that's the reason to have actually a fairly strong panel. And with that, let me introduce Yash first, who is the founder and CEO of Fyle. I think he has been at it for more than 8 years now, but he's no stranger. It's in the expense management space. And I will also say, Yash, that we are a very proud customer of Fyle. Yash is no stranger to startups. He was in senior GTM roles at Qbol, Manthan, Capillary, and paid his dues to large companies as well in the past with Cisco, Airtel, and others. And thank you, Yash, for joining. I know you're not feeling very well, but really, really do appreciate your joining the session today.
Thanks for having me.
With that, let me introduce Mayank. Mayank is the co-founder and CEO of ITILITE, which is in the travel and expense management space. So there is some adjacency actually, and that's just purely a coincidence that happens to be today. Again, like Yash, I remember meeting Mayank also. I think with Mayank, my memory is actually stronger because as we started Stellaris, week one, you were the first company that we diligenced. So this was end of January 2017 that we had spoken. Prior to building ITILITE, Mayank used to be at Myntra and was at McKinsey as well. And thank you, Mayank, for joining as well.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
And Anant. Anant is a partner at Bessemer. I was actually going through your profile and realized that you have had 2 stints in Bessemer, spent more than 8 years. Amongst other areas, Anant also focuses on SaaS. He has been on the boards of Lena, Lentra, and many other companies. And also by virtue of him being in Bessemer, has had the exposure to both classical US-centric investments in SaaS, but many India-centric investment in SaaS like Perfios and others. Anant also used to be a product manager at Amazon in Seattle. And given that Mayank is from McKinsey, Anant offers some variety with his stint at BCG here as well. And Anant, thank you for joining this. And I think if I remember correctly, this is the first time actually we have an investor on the panel in 36 episodes.
Thank you for having me, Alok, and thank you for that unique distinction. And hopefully, I can live up to that first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And everybody here knows Shantan because Shantan and I have been co-hosting this for a while. I'm going to kickstart. And actually, I'll begin with a question for both Yash and Mayank. You can answer in any order. But I recollect that when both of you started your companies, both of you started in India. At some point in your journey, you took a decision to pivot. Would love to understand sort of what made you change your decision. Yes, you want to go first?
Sure. I think when you're at it for a while and you start, so I think as founders, you go through different phases of being delusional, right? So the combination of delusion and optimism is at its peak when you start. And as you start, the years passing by, the delusion, aspect gives, sort of way to certain, reality as well, right? So there's certain amount of reality check as well. I think COVID sort of forced us. In short, COVID forced us because we couldn't answer a very key question that we'd asked ourselves as founders. And then, of course, investors had also been asking, how do you scale from where you are to, let's say, 3x, 5x? And I think that not having an answer for that, right, was the first sort of reality check in that sense, right? So that sort of forced us to think, think outside of, what market we were at that time serving.
So this is more a market size constraint or a headroom for growth constraint, which forced you to, and I'm going to come back to this, Yash, in a minute, but Mayank would also love to get your perspective on this.
So we are still a US plus India company. We have customers in both. The ratio has flipped. We started in India. In fact, I was in US before starting ITILITE with McKinsey. I moved back because I wanted to start in India. Always wanted that fastest to start, easiest wins. And I thought with network, that was true. In India, we got very fast wins. Our business is such, in travel, you have to be global, even if you're serving a single company. So we started, as we went to larger customers, we started serving them in India and US. At some point, we realized when we are serving those companies in India and US, the speed of things happening in US is much faster. So I think it was more for us, the decision. The market, by the way, in travel in India is also quite large, but the speed of things happening, we realize is much faster in US. We can close customers faster, scale them faster. So at some point, it became a very obvious decision that any new investment, the return is much higher in US. So for us, that was more an organic shift from there, that any new investment has to started going to US. And I think we have been at it for 7 years. We started US 2.5 years ago. Today, US business is much more larger than India business. Right? That's the speed angle for us.
Actually, one more follow-up question before I come to Anant is that if you have to sort of go back to your starting line again, would you do it any differently? Both of you have been clearly very successful in what you have built. One answer is that, look, you don't need to change anything. It's actually worked out well. But would you do anything different in that choice that you made in the beginning? Go ahead, Mayank.
I have thought about it multiple times. In fact, very interestingly, my wife started a company, SaaS company, 1.5 years ago, and I had this discussion with her. So at least my view is, I would start US faster. I would personally still not start with US. The way I think about it, the time to start in US is much higher. You need much better polished product. You need your product market fit much deeper. You need to be very clear about what you're selling. India helps you do that faster because people are more open to may not be as polished products. So I would still start in India, but then start US much faster.
Understood. Yash, any different answer for you?
No, I think I would not spend any time, in the India market. I would start with US, and see, I think selling within network, and we did the same as well. Right? Initial wins were all through networks. I think that creates a very false sense of success, right? Even even with people in a network paying all of it, right? It matters when unknown people who care about a problem discover you, or you have a way to reach them, and you're able to convince why your product will solve that problem, right? And initially, even if it is for 10 people, discovering those 10 unknown people is extremely, extremely important, right? And this is something that we've learned over the years after, flipping completely, right? So today we don't have, any customers in India, right? Barring, I think Stellaris and maybe a handful of others.
Thank you for
But-
keeping us as a customer still, Yash. So
But I think in our view, if we were to do a sort of redo, we'd start with US, not spend any time.
Anant, can I flip this question to you? I mean, and clearly not to embarrass you in any way, but Bessemer has been one of the most successful investor in SaaS globally, right? And in India as well. You guys have had some fantastic successes. As you think we are an investor hat, in many ways, Yash and Mayank are coming from a data point of one, which is their company that they are building. You get to see many journeys in this process. So when you think about what kinds of SaaS businesses to back for which market or start with which market, how do you answer that question, or what do you advise your portfolio founders?
And I was saying that, as an investor hat, we can, or at least I can see large scaled up venture return scale, companies being built in both India and the US, software market. It's just that I feel that the segments or the tenets of those companies could be slightly different. And I'll just pick up on two themes that I heard. One was on the TAM that Yash mentioned, that, they ran into a TAM challenge when they were thinking of India. And the other is on the ROI that was mentioned by Mayank, that it seems to be higher in the US versus India. And I'll assume that the ROI means like the average customer value or the money that a customer pays. And I think that is very, and the categories in which they are, which is the expense management, travel management, it kind of resonates with me as well. However, I feel there are other categories where TAM in India could be much larger. For example, software for banking and insurance, software for healthcare, retail and CPG. Those are three large categories where we feel that enterprise, so if you ask me where in India SaaS would I invest, I would invest in enterprise focused BFSI, healthcare, or retail/CPG software, because those are three large industries. Those enterprises have been large buyers of ID software in the past, or ID services in the past, and could potentially flip, to a SaaS model. So that's the TAM that I would go after. Like, for example, that's an example of a TAM which I think is large. And same way in those same categories, the ACVs also tend to be, we're investors in companies like Perfios, Lentra, Zopper. And in all of them, we see 6-digit USD dollar ACVs. So I think it's about the market and it's about the product segment that you pick. But I think you can pick product segments in both India and US software, depending on where you want to play.
Got it. Go ahead, Shantan.
Yash, Mayank, a question for both of you. I mean, given in the middle of your journey, as you decided to concentrate on the US market, what changes did you make in your product strategy and your go-to-market strategy to actually find PMF in the US and also scale up your go-to-market in the US? If you can elaborate your journey at that juncture, it'd be great to hear that. Any of you can go first. Yeah, Mayank, please.
Yeah, I can start. So the conventional wisdom I had received was the products are very different. A lot of people, including investors, said, if you move from India to US, the product may be very different. Yes, there is some difference, but it is very predictable. And I'll use examples rather than high-level statements. In travel, for example, India has chauffeur-driven cabs, and US has rental cars. I can predict that, and I can build that product. And we had to build that product. It took some time. I think what was harder is changing the habits, how the teams behave. Those are very different, and it took us some time to change that. Especially on the engineering side. So in India, almost every, it's a common quote, mid-sized customer behaves like enterprise. Everyone wants a lot of features. So our default way of prioritizing had become, again, how do we build more features? Because the customer wants that. And every feature may not be self-serve because customer will never use it themselves. They would want our account manager to make it, right? And that has become the way of building things. You shift to US, they don't want 100 features, they want 10. But those 10 have to be completely self-serve. Logically, I knew this, but changing the behaviors of team was hard. A very different example in customer success. Customers ask you, will you train my team when you launch this in India? So training is a USP for us in India. We will train you well. When launched in US, some customer success manager used the term, we will train you. And the response was, why? It's not intuitive enough that you have to train me. Right? These are the small things which changing them was actually much harder. And that we had to work on internally. Obviously, the GTM channels are a little different. I think that was changing the product features and channels for us was relatively much easier.
Got it.
Same question to you, Yash.
Yeah, I think in our case, it's, we not only did a market flip, we also did a segment change, right? So in India, we were selling to large enterprises. And in the US, we consciously decided to go after the SMB and mid-market, right? Those are the segments. The problems buyers in India cared about, again, very different from what problems buyers in the US cared about, right? Third, buyer empowerment in India, especially in the segments and the personas we sell to, relatively lower in India compared to the US. I'll explain. When we sell to finance controller's office in the US, a person in a senior staff accountant can take calls for buying software up to whatever, 2,000, 3,000, sometimes even up to $5,000. There have been instances in the past where even a CFO of a 500 crore company, revenue company in India, right, said, I need to check for a 1.5 lakh a month subscription. I need to check with someone, right, before making that call. Right? So I think a lot of this is completely different, and you have to look at this both from the scale of the problem, the value of the benefit they would derive after that problem is solved, and the buyer, sort of relative buyer empowerment in each of these, right? So for example, product engineering, functions, revenue functions in India, like Anant was mentioning, right? They can take calls, right? Speed of decision making is a lot better, faster, and people are empowered. And that needs to be a very, very crucial factor in deciding, okay, whether you want to start with a market where you have access to that, sort of pool of people, pool of buyers, versus thinking otherwise. Right? So I think retracing the buyer journey to the point where they are compelled to solve a problem, I think that should be the first point, even before figuring out, okay, I want, it's not a versus B thing, right? It's not, I want to start in US or I want to start in India. It's basically, can I retrace the journey of this buyer who is compelled to solve this problem by paying a certain amount of money, right? And how am I reaching vast pools of that buyer universe in a fairly cost-effective manner? So that becomes a very, very crucial, sort of aspect. So for us, everything changed, right? Segment, buyer persona, GTM, everything changed. And obviously product. So
how were you able to, restructure your organization to cater to this? Just to follow up on that. How
mean,
difficult was it? I mean,
so I think when COVID sort of played a major role in this, right? We had an office, until 2020. Post COVID, we are a fully remote company, and we had to reorient everything, right? Right from the problem we are solving, who's our ideal customer profile, and it took us about 20 months to define who are ICPs, and you do that iteratively by narrowing every aspect of whom you want to sell to. How are they able to discover you? All of those things, right? Run a bunch of experiments, and we ended up implementing specific sort of. Initially, we started off with OKRs, but more we just obsessively documented everything, right? Right from why are we winning, why are we losing, uh, what is our customer, how is the customer describing the problem, how did they find us, where did they find us, what does it take for us to find more people like this. And it started with us just when we entered the US market, it was just about talking to accountants who were open enough to talk to us about what problems they wanted to see us solved, right? So culturally, I think we ended up creating a remote first culture centered around documentation, measurements, and effectively giving people ownership to also take bets. See, that is also very important. It is not about, hey, we are going to do this, you have to do this. No, it is never about that, right? Everyone, whether it's sales, marketing, everyone had to have a shared understanding of, who our ideal customer is for that quarter. And sometimes we had to define this at a quarterly level, right? Because in terms of in the segment and the market we are in, it's a fairly crowded market. So we had to catch up in terms of feature parity and all. We had to catch up a lot. So how do you decide what to build first?
got it.
Right. So it all, again, based on our ability to attract certain type of, customers. So you can't go by and build and say, I will build everything, right? You have to first narrow down and say, okay, we are only going to, focus on this, which will reflect in the kind of, ad spend content you are, making, kind of product features you're building, kind of integrations you're sort of building, right? So you start with a very, very narrow set and saying, I'm going to do this for these type of companies. And then you start building on. So I think that's how we've, and everything is documented, right? So, internal repository, we track, record practically everything that we have, when it comes to customer interaction. So team is fairly, whether it is engineering, customer success, everyone has a shared understanding of who our ideal customer is, why do they buy, from us, why do we win in those instances, why do we lose, so on and so forth. And that's very important too, which will again translate to sort of alignment between all these functions. And that happens over a period of time. It cannot happen at the start. And we had to do like a lot of adjustment for that.
Got it.
If I
Go
may
ahead,
pick
Alok.
the audience questions, because we have not had a chance to pick any, and I'm going to pick one which was specifically addressed for Anant, which is that when Indian-focused enterprise software companies want to go global, say in financial services, are founders more likely to look at the immediate neighborhood like Southeast Asia and Middle East Asia as opposed to North America? What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think, it's a very interesting one. And, given, our investments in Perfios, Lentras, Opera, some of these companies have had a chance to look at this, a little bit more closely. So the short answer is yes. It is easier to look to some of these immediate markets like Southeast Asia, West Asia, Middle East instead of North America. And there are two primary reasons for it. One, technologically, and this may be a slightly controversial statement to make, but technologically, the American banking system is way behind the Indian banking system. They still don't have real-time payments. They don't have free payments. Account opening still is a combination of, like very manual efforts. It is just a very different, banking system and architecture that exists there. So if an Indian banking software company, for instance, which has been built on a UPI or, kind of KYC through Aadhaar or some of those frameworks which are very unique to India tries to go to the US, the product changes are massive. So that's one big reason why it's harder to go to the US in that segment. Second, if you look at how the banking industry and some of our neighboring markets have evolved, there has always been a lot of, intermingling of talent and relationships in the banking or the insurance ecosystems of, say, India, Southeast Asia, Middle East. A lot of the players are the same. A lot of the people are the same. Some of the technologies are also the same. India has exported some of its technologies to these countries. So you just find it easier to, that they understand the technology. Their banking system is more similar to that of India. The people often have very strong network connections. And so it's just easier to go there. That's been the kind of empirical observations that we've had specifically in like the BFSI world.
Got it. Got it. We'll take one more question that came on the panel, and any of you, by the way, feel free to answer, even though people have touched upon this a little bit. But given, Yash, that you, in fact, touched upon this TAM issue, which is saying that, and the question is that, is the lower TAM primarily because of lower willingness to spend on SaaS tools versus the US market? Would love to understand more on the mindset of the Indian customer to spend on SaaS tools.
I think more than mindset, it has to do with how, what is the value of solving a specific problem? What does it yield, right? If it yields in incremental revenues, everyone is looking at products that will help them make more money, especially in a developing economy like ours, where the cost of labor is relatively lower compared to some of the developed economies, right? So when you have an option of saving money is also ingrained in a cultural sort of sense, right? I'm going to do this with what I have, and I need to ask permission before I need to buy. So there are a lot of these aspects, and that's why the buyer maturity is a very, very important aspect, right? Can they buy, whatever, 10,000 rupee per month kind of a product without asking their manager? Which functions can do this? Very few functions in India, in my opinion, can do this even today, right? Engineering, definitely, right? The developer economy today is actually they can buy tools, because if an engineer uses a tool and becomes 2x productive, it helps them build features faster. So the maturity in tech companies in terms of buying is a lot higher compared to, let's say, a marketing services company that is doing outdoor billboards or whatever, right? So I think it has to do with relative, buyer maturity on if they buy your product, what will the outcome be for that persona? If it's going to help them make efficient, not good enough in India, because efficiency is measured by time, and people don't value time as much because there's no unit value of time, in terms of currency here, right? And this is purely developing economy versus developed economy, principles, right? It's not about anything else, whether they want to buy or not. If I can get someone to do this at whatever 10,000 rupees per month, why would I spend 15,000 rupees even though I can do this job, like, I can save a ton of time, right? But it's never apples to apples, right? Products in India are always compared with solutions, which usually have a people component. And as a country, people have not bought enough products yet. I think that's the other aspect, right? And we can also reflect this within our own buying sort of activity, right? So I think these factors become very important when you think about TAM, right? It's not just about top down, bottom up TAM analysis, right? It is more about if someone buys this product, what is the relative value it will bring to their role, and can they buy this without asking like 10 different people within a company? I think that's our experience, at least.
Mayank, I know you're smiling a lot while Yash was answering the question. I'm presuming you have a slightly different view, so please go ahead.
I think some of those things, exactly the same view. So even now, we sell in India and US parallelly, so we see the contrast very clearly. Right? So value of time, I will generalize again, is very low in India. So if you are saving time, that is valued very less. The other difference which we really see is, and I thought at some point I had a view that we had moved past this. Very frequently in India, we still get asked, it's your software. Software is already written. Why are you charging me so much money? Right? This is a very common question asked to us in India still, when we are saying India is a mature buying product market. As comparison, again, a couple of times in the month, we get asked this in US that you are charging, again, we are priced on the lower end of the market in the US for the same product where we are 10x more expensive than India. We get asked, how will you survive as a company if you're charging this much? I think the thinking in India for most buyers, especially when procurement comes in, is I have to get the best deal. It's only best for us. But in US, we very commonly get to see that how will this buyer survive? How will this buyer be viable? And that leads to higher paying power. Apart from, again, obviously currencies are different. I think that leads to, I think, what Yash was mentioning. The one is ability to pay, ability to take a decision in the business teams, but again, we sell mid market to enterprise. So almost always a procurement team is involved at some step. I think their behavior is very different across two markets. Procurement is just a check in the US. Business teams have taken a decision. They have taken a broadly okay decision and something is not off. In India, I have to get my pound of flesh. Don't care again what the feasibility of the vendor is.
Yeah.
That's why the buying cycles are different. I think going back to one point, just last thing, the type of products, our travel product still is very feasible in India, I would say, because we have seen in Indian market, if you are making money from a different source as well. So travel is a marketplace. When we sell, we make money from something from the customer, but also from the supplier.
Yeah.
As long as you're doing transactions and there is some other money you're making, it's okay. And customers will buy. Don't ask money for me from the software perspective, right? Or I'll try to minimize that, which is very different in the US. Customers understand you'll make money from a supplier, but they still ask, how much am I paying? And I should be paying enough so that you survive and you have a viable business. I think those are very contrasting things. And that's why from an org perspective, our customer facing orgs are also very different for these two geos.
Just, staying on that point, Mayank, only, there's a question on in the chat from Gaurav. You're running both these two businesses. There are two parallel go-to-markets which are going on. What are the challenges that you face while running these two parallel go-to-markets?
So there is a very big contrast on the market side from a GTM perspective. For some time, we tried to do this through kind of a common team, maybe a common manager, teams different. But we realized it has to be, again, that's too much dissonance for the same person and the same team. So our sales, customer success, and marketing are actually different by geo, because the behavior and what we do is very different. Not just segments. The example I gave, right? The training is a good word in India, training is a bad word in the US. We can't just carry over the practices. So there is some common learning. We have forums to share that between teams, but these teams are very different. While product engineering is still common, even there we had to come up with a very clear process that when we prioritize, most of the things we build are global, right? They will be applicable across geographies. But why are we prioritizing this? Are we prioritizing this for our enterprise customers in India now, or are we prioritizing this because of mid-market customers in the US? That process we had to develop.
Got it, Mayank.
I actually do want to, sorry, I know there are a lot of questions on the Q&A panel also, but I'm tempted to ask this question, which is directed to Anant and emanated from a comment from Mayank, is that Mayank referred to the fact that when you sell software in India, sometimes people may have lesser amenity or amenability to pay for software, but they're actually okay paying for transactions, right? So Anant, two questions for you. Number one, as you look at your investment lens for SaaS companies focused on India, is that a major factor, which is the fact that can you make money from transactions or not? Number one. And number two, while you did talk about the verticals as one of the part of your thesis, is SMB versus enterprise also, does that also impact your thesis or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So I think they're also slightly linked. So to answer the first one, I think if you're able to charge for transactions, 100% agree, that it was just much easier to make money in the Indian context, because the understanding then is that there is either a revenue uptake or a business uptake that is happening for some party, and you are getting a commission from that. And like the marketplace model or the commission-based sales model has worked really well in India over the past 10-15 years. So that is 100% true. And so if you are able to do that, if your software allows you to do that, you should definitely do it. And I think that is linked to the second question on enterprise versus SMB. I think if you look at an enterprise customer in India, they are probably already using software either through ID services or through some other way. So when you go to them with a SaaS tool, there is probably a replacement, or there is some sort of a capital budget that is being spent on it, and then it is a replacement, and do I want to pay more, etc., etc. But on the SMB side, most SMBs today are running their business on a combination of, like, if they are running their business online, they're running their business basically on a WhatsApp or, a Tally. And, Tally is probably the only software that SMBs will use. And even that they won't use that directly, their chartered accountant will use it. And WhatsApp is free. There especially, you need to show some transactional revenue. And hence, when we think of SMB SaaS in India, we all, I want to look at what transaction are you actually trying to do, what service. Typically I've seen that SMB SaaS in India tends to be some sort of a productization of a service, that the SMB was paying for a service and now you've given them a software. The software ensures that your service is sticky. There is no churn, but eventually the person is still paying for the service. An example of that is, something like a Pepper Content, which we invested in, which is it's content services. People are not paying, like, while there is a software involved there, the business is paying thinking that, oh, I was going to pay a content agency for content, I am now paying them for content. And the software is not what they think they are paying for. So that is not exactly a transaction, but that is an example of how we think of an SMB first or an India first business, which is not directly vertical in like a BFSI or a retail. Another example of that could be that, and I take this example of, there's a lot of vertical SaaS in the US, right? Like any industry pick up, right from, laundromats to, construction to, car dealerships, there is a vertical SaaS for every one of them. In India, if I think of a vertical SaaS for, say, a car dealers, the number one thing that the car dealer is going to ask is, okay, how are you impacting my sales? And eventually their payment for your software is going to be linked to a calculation they did in their head. By using this software, I was able to sell 2 more cars. Okay, I'm okay to pay, X. So I think that is something we see a lot more on the SMB kind of India side of the world. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, that does. That does. And maybe just one last thing on your thesis. In the verticals you picked, you talked about financial services and healthcare. I know you also talked about CPG and retail, but healthcare and financial services have a unique angle to them, which is that there is usually some level of regulatory barrier around it.
Yes.
Is that an important part of the thesis, or that just happens to be and doesn't matter as much?
I think that is, when we, coming in, we did not think of that as the main reason, but we're realizing that the regulatory aspect creates a tailwind in many sectors. It has also created, for instance, even a GST, has created a tailwind of some sort of software adoption in many SMBs in India. So I think the regulatory aspect is a plus. It will help you, like, if your product proof point is not yet there, you can still say, hey, you are mandated to do this. And I'll give you another example. There's a regulation that came in the pharma industry a couple of years ago that not many people know about, which is that all pharma companies now need to, disclose marketing spends that they made on their doctor channel. because that is now being taxed. Now, to do this, they need some sort, like there is no way they can do this reporting if they don't track it officially. And if they have to track it, they need some software to track it. So now you may get in with this kind of a hook, even though that is not like, there is no value prop in giving that software. The value prop is in a CRM or a lead management thing. But that is something we are seeing companies using this as a wedge. Hey, we know you have to do this. Our software also does this. And then that convinces the procurement or the CFO person, okay, at least something is getting solved, rest ROI I'll see. So it can be a tailwind. I don't think it's the only reason to sell.
Understood. A question for you, Yash, given that you moved to the US, on one hand, in the earlier days of SaaS in India, you could do remote sales and have that go-to-market motion even for global markets. And today we are seeing a lot of Indian companies, even in early stage, hiring local US-based talent. So can you talk about what was your strategy over here? And how do you make as a founder, how do you make trade-offs between hiring local US-based teams versus managing a remote team to do go-to-market?
I mean, I'm here. Our entire company is India-based. We have no physical presence in the US yet, right? So I think, again, goes back to how the buyer buys, right? Now, you cannot change buyer behavior. If a buyer needs to meet people before making a decision, you have to do that way. If a buyer is comfortable, buying online, you have to meet them there, right? So it's not one strategy for everything, right? It goes back to the buyer behavior and the buyer journey, right? So if you are in a segment, if you are in a space where there is a fair amount of search volume, right? You can start with an online first kind of a GTM, right? Because that also gives you a way to test whether the solution that you are building to solve that problem is resonating with the buyer, right? And these are established ways of reaching to customers, right? So for a try and buy buyer, right? If you go and tell the buyer that, hey, let me show you a demo, it will not work, because they will say, I want to try the product before making a decision. The reverse is also true, right? If a persona is not used to trying and buying a product, and you create a free trial led motion, it will not really resonate, right? So you have to trace the buyer journey, right? And more importantly, the problem journey, right? So problem has various stages within a buyer's mindset, right? You have accepted it. It reaches a point, there are triggers, and based on those triggers, you feel the need to solve it, right? How are you understanding that sort of journey, right? Saying those things are very important. And then, okay, how are you figuring out how to reach this buyer, right? So I think these become more important than, should I have people there or not, right? Like I said, today we've closed $1 million deals, remotely, right? I've met them after we've closed deals, right? And even while we were selling in India, we were a remote sales team, right? We had hired chartered accountants as our salespeople, early days of selling in India. And in India, people were, it was almost second nature to, why don't you come down and meet? You're sitting in Delhi, I'm sitting in Bangalore. If someone is interested, why don't you come down tomorrow and meet? Right. So I think it's very different, right? So doing things remotely makes it efficient to a certain point, right? But it's super important to get to that point, and then decide whether adding in person, will sort of double, triple, quadruple this efficiency, as opposed to them being the reason for you to define, if you're selling to enterprise, you have to sell the way the buyer buys. You're selling to SMB, figure out your buyer motion. Right? So I think that is far more important than whether they're based in India, based in US. US today is very open, right? Most of them know that they're buying products from someone who's actually based in India. They don't care. They appreciate the fact that, we have salespeople sitting all night Some of them are apologetic. I'm making you come on a call at whatever 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the night, right? So they're well aware. So gone are the days of creating a fake name. All of those days are practically gone. Right? People are appreciative of good products, great service, and responsiveness, right? Which is very, very hard for US companies to deliver. And that's a clear competitive advantage for companies in India.
I want to pick a question, and I'm going to broaden that question and address it to Mayank. And the question is from, actually, the name is not given, but the company name is given, which is Caliber.ai. So I'm assuming it's one of the founders of Caliber.ai here. But the question will probably be true for many, many people on the call. So we are selling in India currently, since the product is still maturing up, not dissimilar, Mayank, from sort of what you were saying. Our current thinking is that as the product matures a little bit more in the next 6 to 9 months, we would like to sell in North America. Other than product maturity, what other things should be taken care as preparation towards being North America ready? So is there like a different checklist to be to be GTM ready for North America compared to what you might have already learned in India? And I actually want to broaden that to product also, because while you did talk about the fact that you need to narrow down and it's sort of do it yourself, how did you change that orientation also as you did the product also?
I think a lot of things change when you go towards North America. As a founder, at least I have never felt the product is completely polished and ready. So it'll always feel 6 to 9 months away from getting ready. So start quicker. That's what I have learned. What I was trying to define earlier, think of a graph, time and revenue. India graph starts early and has a lesser slope. US graphs take longer time. At least that was true for us. Selling the first customer was much harder, took longer, even though we had been in business and new things, but the slope is higher. Because we had to even figure out new GTM channels. We are still very outbound heavy company in India. We started from lower end of the mid market in US, and that was very inbound heavy. Ads, inbound, organic, and that took time. So that you can't overnight flip and become an inbound company in a day. Organic, in fact, takes a longer time. So it has to be started faster. Apart from channel, the way of selling also changes. Way of selling, we realized as a company, we were always very ROIs and value focused, very less relationship focused in selling. That works much better in US. So that was natural fit for us, but that has to be learned for some companies which are very in an outbound motion, very relationship focused sales. Product wise, also, I think after you start selling and start getting customer feedback, we realize what is the nuances which are different. Today, it's very easy or relatively easy for us to figure out, is this a global ask from a customer? This will work for all customers, or is this region specific or segment specific? Before starting, I couldn't have figured that. So again, the faster you start receiving that feedback. So I think both GTM marketing, sales process, if you are outbound, and product, a lot of things are going to change. So my suggestion will be start as soon as possible and not wait for that 6 to 9 months when product is fully ready.
But Mayank, isn't that sometimes, doesn't that put a challenge from a resource perspective? Because, you are a young company, you have only so many people and you have only so much funding. And frankly, if I may say, in the current environment where funding has actually become harder to get to, you are making then a choice that do I take a parallel path and try and get somewhere in both of them, vis-a-vis do I just get in one and maybe hopefully with that go a little bit further in that? So those trade-off calls also founders are making. How would you then balance those factors?
If the answer is clear, so I assume this thing, if the answer is clear, in 6 to 9 months, I have to go to US and that's the market. I think starting as early as possible is very clear.
Understand.
We were, for the first 5 years, very clear that India is going to be a big market. So we only were doing India and started US only when we said, now we have resources and time to start another one.
Understand.
Question for you, Anant. Given I think you've answered a part of this question actually, but I'll still like to hear a bit more about, as a venture investor, I think you did focus on certain categories where you do feel that there is depth in the India market. But for SaaS businesses which are focused in towards India market, are there any other particular characteristics of businesses that you do like in terms of, let's say, enterprises, some sort of a transaction-based revenues, all that aspect? And also, what are the exit paths of some of these businesses as an investor?
Yeah, so I think on what do we look for, I think one clear thing is if you're an enterprise focused business selling to one of the three, one of these three kind of verticals, which is BFSI, healthcare, and retail/consumer product companies. So that's one thing that we look for. The other thing is, or are you in a kind of a, maybe not an enterprise focused in these three enterprises, but you have a transactional revenue component to it, which allows you to create more revenue. That's the other thing. The third thing we actually try to see is that is there a founder market fit, as we like to call it? Because in India, sales, especially in the enterprise, there is a lot of relationship that matters in these sales. If you have to sell into an HDFC bank, unless like if you're going to try and crack it open cold, you could still succeed. But the probability of you doing that cold is much lower than if you either come from the industry, have sold to the same person before. So I think, have the founders or has some part of the founding team sold or built products for that specific industry so that they have the context and the network, to actually kind of make that work is another thing. The third thing is actually capital efficiency. We feel that India lends itself to a much more capital efficient software business model. If you're trying to sell in the US, especially to enterprise, you need to, you'll have, long sales cycles. You need some people on the street. Your sales and marketing cost could be much higher. But if you're selling to, enterprises in India, we think that, in fact, one of the heuristics that we have is that if an India-focused software business gets to around 8-10 million of revenue, then outside of hyper growth, the company should actually be fairly sustainable on its own. Because, if you're making roughly 80-85 crores of revenues at 80% gross margin, that's around like 60 crores of, gross margin that you're bringing in. You'll have to hire a really lot of people to be able to spend that 60 crores in a year. Even if you have a bunch of engineers, say, so the only thing you should need money for is hyper growth. That, okay, I need to do branding campaigns, I need to like double my sales force. Of course, that will need money and it will continue to need money. But as a rule of thumb, India businesses we find have much higher efficiencies, and we look for our efficiency bar on an India-focused SaaS business is much higher than the efficiency bar on a US-focused SaaS business. So those are some of the different things, or look, apart from all the ARR growth, all that stuff is common, but these are some of the other things that we try to look for.
And Anant, maybe just as a follow-up to your last statement, where you said that you like the efficiency bar for India-focused companies to be higher, is that because you feel that, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm pushing the buttons here a little bit. Is that because you feel that the more feasible exit path in India is likely to be an IPO, and one will need to be EBITDA positive to go IPO in India, versus acquisitions is usually the, for large scale acquisitions also, US is actually far more fertile market, and you don't need to be necessarily profitable to be able to get to that outcome.
Yeah, no, that is definitely one of the reasons for it. And it also goes back to the other question that, sorry, I forgot, but you asked around the exit paths. I think IPO is definitely one viable exit path. Tech services companies in India have been going public for many years in India. And it's a sector that the Indian public markets understands well. So I think from that respect, IPO is a reasonable path. And if you have to go IPO in India, eventually it comes down to your EBITDAs and your ROCEs. So the lower amount of capital you've raised to get to a certain point, the more attractively or favorably the market will actually see you when you go out and list. So that is definitely one reason. The other reason also is that, if you, one of the drawbacks of, or one of the cons, or one of the, I mean, it's a con because it's a fact. The ACV, and this is the point that Mayank mentioned, the ACV of the same bank, like if you're selling a loan origination system to a bank in India, which does a certain amount of business, versus a bank in, say, the US, which does a certain amount of business, the ACV will be lower in India. So unless you can make your economics work for lower ACVs, you should not have the cost structure of a US-focused SaaS company, because the economics will not work.
Yeah.
So that's the more fundamental reason, that your ACVs are never, it's going to be much harder to have $1 million ACVs. So you should not staff your sales team to be creating like $1 million ACV. Whereas in the US world, having $1 million ACV in the enterprise world is quite, is much easier. As soon as you get to the $10-12 million mark, you'll probably have $1 million ACV customer. In India, that's much harder. So that's the other more fundamental reason, that for your economics to work, you need to be efficient.
Got it. Got it. Is it okay if I chime in with one more question, Shanthan? While this is not coming on the board here, I do want to ask, because in our portfolio also, and even otherwise, I've seen, and it has come up in many different SaaS talks. So let's assume you're a founder, you have been selling in India so far. And this is for both Yash and Mayank. And I don't want to, let's say you have 20 customers, 40 customers, you have $1 million ARR, I'm just making it up. And now you decide that, look, I have to sell to US as well. Now, Mayank, I know you have spent time in the US, but there are many founders who have actually not lived in the US, for example, in the past as well. Now, as you are making that transition, there are certain changes you might need to do to the product, even if not massive, some. And like Yash mentioned, you also have to understand the buyer behavior in that place, how they buy. Would you advise in this kind of a situation for founders to go and spend some time in the US? Not that they have to move to US, or actually, would you advise them to move to US? Or you're saying, look, that factor is actually completely unimportant. You should be able to do what research you need to do, just purely sitting out of India as well. Either of you, please go ahead.
I think the objective is to talk to, let's say, 50 buyers. However you can get to it, hook or crook.
Got it.
Right? We have probably done all the wrong things we can do to get there. Although I had lived in the US, that was completely useless from a buyer perspective. We are not selling to all my contacts. I looked at my LinkedIn so many times, are in large tech companies from IITs or IIMs, or McKinsey customers are also large companies. We are selling to mid-market based in the middle of US. I had no contacts there. So we tried, even if you think you can get 50 remote conversations to understand, I think nothing like it. If you can't, then there are ways. I think for us, the economical way has been attend a small relevant conference in the US. Not large ones. They are very, very expensive. The small ones, you can even get a conference pass for like exhibitor pass for $2,000, fully loaded $5,000 spent, and you get to speak to 20, 30 relevant people, right? So whatever it takes to talk to 50 people is okay.
Got it. Very useful. Yash, any different thoughts?
No, I think spot on there. I think talking to people who are not within the network, by hook or crook, right? So whether you have to be there, do it online, hound people, harass people online, remotely, do cold calling, whatever it takes. So
fantastic. It's 10:30. We promise we will end on time, even though there are probably 20 more questions on the board. We'll not be able to answer those right now. But thanks to everyone who attended, but a special thanks to Yash, Mayank, and Anant for being on the panel today. And Yash, particular to you, because I know you're not feeling well and it's pretty obvious, but really appreciate you joining today. Thank you.